Welcome back to Harbor. Well, we're learning more about that nightmarish attack on a school in Pakistan today. At least 7 Pakistani Taliban militants stormed the military-run school and killed 145 people, nearly all of them young students. As one parent described it to the Associated Press, "My son was in uniform in the morning. He's in a casket now. My son was my dream. My dream has been killed." The Taliban claimed responsibility and said it was retaliation for the military's campaign against them, which began in the summer. In London, Secretary of State John Kerry condemned the attack.
The images are absolutely gut-wrenching. Young children carried away in ambulances, a teacher burned alive in front of the students. A house of learning turned into a house of unspeakable horror. And Prime Minister Sharif said, "These are my children. It is my loss." Well, this morning, wherever you live, wherever you are, those are our children. And this is the world's loss.
And President Obama said in the statement, "Our hearts and prayers go out to the victims, their families, and loved ones. By targeting students and teachers in this heinous attack, terrorists have once again shown their depravity. We stand with the people of Pakistan and reiterate the commitment of the United States to support the government of Pakistan in its efforts to combat terrorism and extremism and to promote peace and stability in the region." Richard Engels, NBC's chief foreign correspondent, and Michael Crowley is a senior foreign policy reporter for Politico. Richard, if you can, tell us what happened in that school about 17 hours ago.
We've spoken to military officials, we've spoken to survivors, witnesses. This attack unfolded, and it was a massacre. It was a bloodbath, unfolded over about 8 hours. It began local time around 10:40 in the morning, and a lot of the students were in an assembly. Some were taking an exam. Others were attending a kind of a career fair, and gunmen, 7 at least, all of them wearing suicide belts, cut through a fence, climbed over a fence, stormed into the assembly. At least one of the suicide attackers blew up his device, and then the others, at least 6 at this point, started opening fire indiscriminately. Then they fanned out through the classrooms. This was a large compound that had grades 1 through the end of high school. Most of the classrooms that they went to were of the older students, the ones who were 16 to 18. And the militants just went room to room, firing as students tried to hide under their desks. They were shot in the legs, they were shot in the head. A lot of the students tried to barricade themselves into the classrooms. The militants forced their way in and continued their murder spree for about an hour until the commandos arrived in helicopter. They landed in a soccer stadium not far away. They commenced an assault on the compound, but a lot of the rooms had been booby-trapped, and it was difficult to enter. And a gunfight then lasted for the next 7 hours or so as the military tried to clear the building, and then ultimately they did kill all of the militants, but the death toll was horrific. About 142 killed, over 130 of them students.
While you're on, I just want to ask you, you've lived in that region, you're a great reporter over there. What can you tell us about the thinking of a person who would do this and believe they were the good guy?
The logic is one of an eye for an eye, at least in their minds. The Pakistani military, about 6 months ago, in the spring, began an offensive in northern Waziristan. And this offensive in North Waziristan has been devastating. You know, we've seen images come out of there of some villages that have been flattened, all of the people forced out. And this part of North Waziristan is a Taliban stronghold. So from their perspective, they believe the Pakistani military is killing our children. We're going to respond by targeting their children. And this school, we've called it an army-run school. It's not a military academy. The students there aren't learning to be cadets. It is a school that is a public school. It's open to civilians, but primarily it is for the children of the military. So you ask what the logic is. The logic is you kill us, we'll go find your children.
Michael Crowley, your view and feelings about this.
Well, Chris, it goes without saying my feelings are horror and astonishment, and just deep depression also that this is just seems to be something we're spending almost on a daily basis talking about stories like this, where suicidal fanatics are killing innocent people in places like schools or in coffee shops, as we saw in Sydney. This is the product of something that, this is sort of a backlash to something that the U.S. thinks is a good thing, which is this military offensive in Waziristan. This is something that we've been wanting the Pakistanis to do, which is to take on their domestic Taliban. And in fact, that offensive killed a very senior al-Qaeda leader several days ago, which is something that, Obama officials were pretty pleased about. I think they've either killed or captured some other al-Qaeda leaders in that region recently as well. So this is a horrible byproduct of something that does fit with our basic U.S. policy goals, but it's clear that Pakistan does not really have its arms around this problem. And when you're talking about a country with nuclear weapons, I think that it's a foreign policy problem that doesn't command the headlines, except in cases of atrocities like this, but really remains one of the lingering unsolved problems in American foreign policy.
I have something to say about it later in the program, but today NBC released a new poll that shows significant support in this country for torture. 51% of Americans say harsh interrogation practices following the 9/11 attacks were acceptable under the circumstances, and 45% say that harsh interrogation tactics are acceptable enough to use again in the future. Richard, what do you make of this? I must tell you that in terms of the partisan breakdown, the crosstabs, the Democrats are against torture as a party, people in the party who identify as Democrats, whereas Republicans are 80% for torture. And it's more mixed, of course, as it often is among independents. Your view, does that surprise you, this sort of, it's not eye for an eye, and it certainly doesn't compare to what we're talking about and what happened just less than a day ago in Pakistan in terms of violence and cruelty?
No, there's no comparison there. But I was somewhat surprised by it, and I'd be curious to know how exactly that poll was worded. I mean, were people asked, if your life is on the line and a suspect is holding the trigger to a nuclear bomb, do you think he should be interrogated harshly or beaten up? But that's not necessarily the way these programs worked. People were held, they were interned, they were abused and humiliated, sexually humiliated for years at a time. So I'm not sure if the public really understands what happened here, extends how these kind of interrogations would work. And if they do, it's revealing about the state of thinking in this country. But torture is still illegal. I mean, it's basic in the Bill of Rights. You shouldn't have cruel and unusual punishment. So what the public thinks on this necessarily probably shouldn't have a bearing.
Thanks so much, Richard Anko. Thank you, Michael Crowley. We'll hear from you later on other topics. We'll have much more on the torture debate in this program tonight and the politics of that fight. Coming up with the roundtable, all that's coming back here. A lot more on torture tonight. And this is Hardball, where you hear the debate.